Throughout most of the 1900s, dialing for help in the United States meant an American LaFrance rig would likely pull up. From major hubs like Chicago and New York to tiny Midwestern villages, the location of the blaze never changed the outcome. Any engine arriving to battle the flames almost certainly sported that iconic American LaFrance emblem right on its nose. Back in 1947, the company pioneered the cab-forward look, establishing the standard layout that nearly all contemporary pumpers still follow. While World War II raged, their Elmira plant operated 24/7 to churn out thousands of units for global military installations, spanning the entire country. Local stations relied on American LaFrance machinery because those on the front lines knew their safety depended on those rigs. Heading into the 1960s, the brand ruled the market with the same kind of authority Ford held over the car industry. At its height, the 48-acre Elmira facility supported 3,000 employees, ensuring every significant United States city housed their trucks in local bays. Their unique curved cab aesthetic set a benchmark that rival manufacturers spent the next several decades trying to emulate. Eventually, the corporate vultures moved in, including names like Figgie International Freightliner and the group known as Patriarch Partners. Every new owner pledged a rescue, yet they all essentially gutted the business for assets before moving on to the next. By January 2014, nearly 2 centuries of history ended as American LaFrance folded, marking the tragic downfall of Elmira's most celebrated enterprise. The saga begins with Truxton LaFrance, a skilled blacksmith who constructed his initial steam-powered engine back in 1873. Part 1, the blaze that redefined the game. Bravery wasn't lacking for the crews of 1832. They had grit and spades, but their tools were completely inadequate. Manual pumpers forced groups to labor intensely for pathetic water flow, while the wooden levers often snapped when things got intense. While leather hoses frequently ruptured, the available steam models were too pricey and temperamental for the average department to even consider. Recognizing a gap in the market, John Rogers launched a manual fire pumper business based out of Waterford, New York. It wasn't groundbreaking tech, but his gear was dependable and built to withstand the rigors of the job. Lysander Button took over the operation by 1841, eventually shifting the focus toward developing steam-driven fire equipment. Throughout the 1860s, the Button Fire Engine Works successfully produced more than 200 distinct machines, refining their designs over time, yet urban infernos persisted like the 1871 Chicago disaster that leveled miles of the city. Boston faced a similar fate shortly after, as crews armed with top-tier gear were forced to watch helplessly as neighborhoods turned to soot. A superior solution was required, and that is precisely when Truxton LaFrance stepped onto the stage of history. This Pennsylvania smith had observed the chaos of fire scenes for years, possessing a deep mastery of metallurgy mechanics and steam. He felt certain he could engineer a rotary steam engine that surpassed existing models in pressure durability and overall longevity. During 1872, LaFrance joined forces with a group of backers, most notably General Alexander S. Diven and his 4 boys. The group eventually bought out a modest fire apparatus shop located in the town of Elmira, New York. Christening it the LaFrance Manufacturing Company, they opened a 10-acre shop on the grounds of an old Southport barrel plant. By late 1873, their premier rotary steam engine was ready for local testing, where it showcased impressive power and seamless operation. Crucially, the machine held up during long runs, prompting the city of Elmira to put in an immediate purchase request. While other municipalities took note, what truly separated LaFrance from the pack was their unique business approach at the time. Initially, they didn't just build fire rigs. Their catalog featured everything from corn shellers and cotton pickers to full-scale train engines. Having such a broad product line ensured the cash kept coming in while their specialized firefighting division found its footing. It proved to be a brilliant move, as competitors who only sold one item often folded when the economy took a dip. The LaFrance operation stayed afloat simply by manufacturing whatever the market was willing to pay for at the moment. As the 1880s rolled around, the hunger for high-end fire gear allowed them to pivot entirely toward the emergency services sector. By 1880, they rebranded the firm as the LaFrance Fire Engine Company to reflect this new singular focus. They ditched the farm tools and trains to stick solely to pumpers, a strategy that paid off as contract numbers climbed. With the Elmira factory growing larger, the brand's name for dependable machinery became legendary across the entire northeastern United States. The legacy Truxton LaFrance built wasn't merely a piece of equipment, it was the bedrock of an industry. For the next 140 years, that base would uphold a premier American brand, though building a true empire required even more. A grander vision was necessary, one that wouldn't truly manifest until the turn of the 20th century. Big Business Mergers, Part 2, The Monopolies That Forged a Kingdom. The 1890s defined the age of industrial giants. John D. Rockefeller absorbed petroleum firms into Standard Oil. Meanwhile, JP Morgan fused steel mills to create U.S. Steel. Merging wasn't solely for killing rivals, it focused on maximizing efficiency, unifying manufacturing methods, and dominating whole markets. The fire truck business was totally scattered. Scores of minor builders vied for municipal fire deals. Equipment reliability was all over the place. Certain shops turned out top tier gear, others churned out hazardous trash that broke down when lives were at stake. No single player held sufficient power to establish trade norms. 1891, the firm of Lysander Button. That identical Button who acquired John Rogers' shop 5 decades prior took a massive gamble. He joined forces with three leading steam engine producers, Silsby Manufacturing plus Aaron's Clapp and Jones Manufacturing. This group established the American Fire Engine Company, basing operations in Seneca Falls, New York. This union pooled the sector's premier design experts. Uniform components made maintenance much simpler. Increased factory output translated to quicker shipping schedules. Municipalities preferred partnering with a trusted brand over risking it with tiny outfits. All the while, LaFrance Fire Engine Company stayed autonomous in Elmira. Mighty local footprint, stellar name recognition. Though their output paled against the American Fire Engine Company, LaFrance required expansion for countrywide competition. Here comes Charles Lockatch, a Chicago tycoon seasoned in big business acquisitions. Lockatch spotted a chance within the fire gear sector. During 1900, he coordinated a massive corporate marriage. He united American Fire Engine and LaFrance with Thomas Manning Jr. and Company, adding 3 auxiliary gear makers and 3 extinguisher producers. This fresh organization was dubbed the International Fire Engine Company. Judged by the books, International Fire Engine Company seemed invincible. The conglomerate held the lion's share of fire truck production across the continent. Offerings ranged from manual pumps to cutting-edge steamers, with plants scattered throughout several regions. Deep ties with fire crews in every metropolis, it appeared to be a perfect merger. At least that was the consensus. The issue haunting International Fire Engine Company was its sheer complication. Excessive departments, bloated catalogs, and varied factory protocols caused chaos. Leaders struggled to synchronize the moving pieces. Build standards plummeted, arrival dates dragged, overhead soared since no one had optimized the workflow post-merger. Come 1903, International Fire Engine Company went belly up. The merger flopped, yet the resources remained precious. It just required competent oversight. Amid the insolvency restructuring, a fresh business debuted in 1903, American LaFrance Fire Engine Company Limited. Their branding blended titles from the 2 heavy hitters of the collapsed trust, American Fire Engine and LaFrance Fire Engine. Fresh management retained the winning parts and ditched the rest. By 1900, 6 corporate offices shifted from New York City down to Elmira. This move carried significant weight. Elmira offered industrial facilities, expert laborers, train hubs, and cheaper expenses than Manhattan. Crucially, Elmira housed the classic LaFrance plant, staffed by people who truly knew how to craft elite fire equipment. The firm's soul resided in Elmira. Finally, the command center was there as well. 1907 marked the following breakthrough. American LaFrance rolled out its initial engine-driven fire truck. 0 equines, 0 steam tanks, just a gas-powered internal combustion motor. Shifting from coal-fired steam to gasoline revolutionized the game. Quicker dispatch, simpler upkeep, and reduced running prices. Firefighters could launch trucks instantly without stalling for the boiler to heat up. By 1910, American LaFrance went all in on motorized gear. The outfit that nearly died 7 years back now spearheaded industry progress. The merger finally clicked. Forget the messy International Fire Engine attempt. The lean American LaFrance model actually succeeded. Their contrast proved that uniting firms yields power only with proper leadership. This takeaway was vital, as 75 years later, new bosses would totally ignore it. Part 3, Invention and Growth. From 1910 through the Great War, American LaFrance took a weird turn. They began crafting luxury cars for the public. Why would fire truck makers build cars? Simple variety. The factory had room, the crew had the talent. Constructing personal vehicles when fire rig demand dipped ensured the staff stayed busy and the money kept coming in. Between 1910 and 1920, American LaFrance turned out roughly 22 consumer autos along with a few racers. These weren't assembly line models. Every unit was basically a bespoke creation using Crane Simplex frames, fast, pricey, and tailored for rich buyers seeking exclusivity. A few vintage American LaFrance fire rigs even got transformed into sporty roadsters by enthusiasts chasing that beefy motor and solid build. Their automotive venture didn't exactly take off yet. It proved just how adaptable the firm's designers truly were. American LaFrance was capable of crafting just about any motorized machine. Such versatility paid off when wars required shifting gears for defense needs. Still, their true breakthroughs happened in fire safety gear. 1927 saw a major buyout. American LaFrance scooped up Utica, New York's own O.J. Childs Company. Childs was the brain behind foamite, a chemical foam solution for dousing blazes in harsh weather from 15 below zero to 110 degrees. This changed the game for factory fires where plain water failed. The outfit rebranded as American LaFrance Foamite Corporation. That moniker lasted roughly 30 years, though they eventually moved away from it during the 1960s. The 1930s delivered the specific advancement that cemented the American LaFrance legacy for years to come. By 1931, they launched the first V12 motor in the business. It offered extra grit and dependability for massive pumps and long ladders. Other shops were stuck with standard 4 or 6-cylinder blocks. American LaFrance blew past everyone. Responders took note. During a 5-alarm blaze, you need every bit of horsepower available. American LaFrance rigs moved more liquid and tackled sharper grades. Outperforming every rival in the field, 1938 saw another first, the compact cab-over aerial service truck. The cockpit sat right over the front wheels, making it easier to navigate cramped city alleys. This design was a hit, leading to the legendary 700 series in 1947. Near the mid-1920s, American LaFrance had manufactured 4,000 fire engines. They were respected, if a bit old-fashioned, in their approach. They kept chain drives until 1935 and waited until 1965 for diesels. However, being traditional meant being dependable. Fire leaders trusted these trucks during life-or-death moments. The city of Elmira thrived because of it. The American LaFrance facility stood as Elmira's biggest source of jobs. Solid pay, reliable hours, and trades needing real expertise. Whole generations centered their livelihoods on working for the brand. Dads taught their boys how to weld and shape steel. This place wasn't just a paycheck, it was Elmira's soul. Elmira became known as the global hub for fire truck manufacturing. That fame was forged through global conflicts and economic crashes. American LaFrance continued crafting the finest emergency vehicles in the nation. Yet the finest work lay ahead, their boldest move, the 700 series, Part 4. The conflict that rescued Elmira as Europe went to war in 1939, American LaFrance was doing okay, but hadn't won the market. Various rivals made decent trucks. It was a tough field until government defense orders began pouring in. Federal agencies required fire protection for army posts, shipyards, and new runways going up both at home and abroad. Thousands of rigs, quick turnaround, and builds tougher than any civilian truck. American LaFrance pivoted to support the front lines. The Elmira factory moved to round-the-clock operations, crews swapped places constantly, and the production line stayed in motion. Fire apparatus streamed out of the shop at all hours. Job numbers went through the roof. Pre-war, the payroll had just a few hundred names. By the height of the fighting, it hit nearly 3,000. Imagine the impact on a town like Elmira. All those fresh employees needed roofs over their heads. New subdivisions sprang up instantly around the plant. Old pastures became whole residential blocks in a matter of months. Diners kept their lights on all night to feed the graveyard crews finishing up at sunrise. Markets stayed open late. Local services grew fast to handle the growth. Even the plant itself looked different. Factories that sat mostly vacant through the hard times were suddenly buzzing at their absolute limit. Fresh machinery rolled in while new production lines were set up. The foundry stayed busy casting motor blocks and water pump housings day and night. Meanwhile, the machine shop ran 3 full rotations with staff operating equipment 24/7. These laborers were the real deal. High-level experts who spent decades honing their specific skills. Metal workers who could fuse steel and aluminum with flawless accuracy. Technicians mastered the complex pressure systems required for fire suppression. Painting crews applied thick finishes meant to endure decades of brutal weather. Every single truck needed dozens of specialized pros sharing their unique expertise. The crew felt the gravity of their mission. They knew they weren't just assembling vehicles. They were crafting tools to defend naval yards and air bases. This equipment would keep American soldiers safe if those bases were hit. Every hand on deck knew a sloppy joint or a failing valve could mean the difference between saving a base or losing it. That realization baked a standard of perfection into the very walls of the plant. Wages were solid, and there was always extra work available. But beyond the pay, people were proud of their output. These rigs saved lives and kept the war machine moving forward. Every American LaFrance unit shipped abroad represented the combined talent of the Elmira team. Throughout World War II, American LaFrance built thousands of engines for the military. While totals vary by report, the output was massive. Hundreds were sent to our allies through the Lend-Lease initiative. Australia alone received 58 pumpers and 7 ladder trucks. These specific units utilized American LaFrance's own powerful 12-cylinder engines. Firefighters down under later claimed these were the best machines they had ever worked with. The firm also expanded its production beyond just fire equipment. Building plane parts and various combat supplies, American LaFrance stepped in wherever their factory could meet military demands. By August 1945, Japan gave up and the fighting ceased. Government contracts vanished almost instantly. Thousands of pending truck orders were scrapped. Many builders faced the same downturn seen after the First World War. They had huge facilities, but no buyers leaving a staff that wanted work facing sudden layoffs. But American LaFrance had planned ahead this time. While they built war machines, their designers were sketching out the next era of city trucks. They used every lesson learned from military field tests. They listened to what firefighters liked and what they hated about their current rigs. They came up with a bold concept that would change the whole industry. The 700 series was ready for prime time. American LaFrance just had to be gutsy enough to risk it all. In 1947, they did just that. Chapter 5, the 700 series shift. American LaFrance killed off every single old product and traditional model. When chiefs called to buy the old-style engines, they were told those weren't available anymore. It was the 700 series or nothing. This was the biggest gamble the fire industry had ever seen. Most companies don't just tell their clients that their old tastes are irrelevant. You don't usually scrap a successful line for an unproven idea, but American LaFrance did. The 700 series used a cab-forward layout. The driver sat in front of the engine rather than behind it. This setup improved forward sightlines by 250% over the old designs. A standard pumper could turn in just 25 feet. Despite the 160-inch base, it handled tight streets with ease. That level of agility was a total game changer. The body was sleekly shaped and lacked a front grille. It looked like those modern diesel trains coming from General Motors. Some people loved the look, while others found it bizarre. But anyone who got behind the wheel was sold. Seeing the road better made driving so much safer. Moving weight off the front made steering effortless. The cab-forward design was simply a better way to build. American LaFrance provided 4 different 12-cylinder motor options: 190, 204, 215, or the huge 240 horsepower model. Buyers picked what worked for their specific town and hills. The 700 lineup was massive, with pumpers moving 500 to 1,500 gallons per minute. Ladder trucks ranged from 65 to 100 feet, including tractor-drawn and city service units. They offered quad and quint combos, along with specialized hose and booster vehicles. From emergency response units to all-wheel drive airfield pumpers, the 700 line offered a setup for every possible station requirement. The initial batch of 700 series rigs rolled out to local crews in March of 1947. People loved them right away. Even the most doubtful department heads became believers once they actually got behind the wheel. Crews praised the clear sight lines and easy steering, which quickly triggered a flood of new purchase requests. Over 1,400 of these forward control units were in service by the time 1950 wrapped up. That risky bet was working, though the full industry shift wasn't immediate. Rival builders first laughed off the cab-over look as a mere fad. Their tune changed as American LaFrance dominated the sales charts. Engineers at Pierce began dissecting the 700's secrets. Seagrave and Mack took notice too. Within 10 years, nearly every big name in the business was launching their own front-mounted cabs. A new benchmark had been established. The 700 series was now recognized as the definitive American pumper, not only for its sales figures, but for how it completely reinvented the aesthetic and functionality of emergency vehicles. They rolled out more affordable options like the Ranger in 1955, followed by the Crusader and Protector. These budget builds featured painted trim, shorter windows, glassless door panels, and basic utility fenders. In an effort to slash prices even more, generic Continental motors replaced those iconic 12-cylinder powerhouses. While these versions found buyers, they tarnished the company's premium reputation. Purchasing agents got a decent machine, but it lacked the raw power and prestige of a true 12-cylinder 700. A segment of the market began to feel the manufacturer was prioritizing savings over quality. That negative image eventually caused major issues. From 1947 through 1959, production exceeded 3,700 units. Other records suggest 3,534 vehicles were made, spanning 272 unique variations. Only about 10% of that fleet survives today, with a few still running calls for small-town volunteer crews. Collectors and museums have saved the rest, including some museum-quality pieces that look like they just left the factory. Though replaced by the 8 and 900 series in 1959, the impact of the original stayed strong. Walk into a modern station and you will see the influence. The driver sits out front with the motor tucked behind. We use that layout today because American LaFrance validated the concept 75 years back. That is true industry leadership. It is more than just sales. It is about creating the blueprint that every competitor eventually adopts. They owned the market before tossing it all away with poor management. Chapter 6, The Long Decline. Fame Brings Outsiders. In 1955, Sterling Precision merged with the brand to establish the American LaFrance Corporation. Observe how the hyphen was dropped. The deal provided growth funds, but also introduced a layer of corporate bureaucracy that often clashed with the actual needs of the factory floor. More drastic shifts occurred in 1966 when the firm was absorbed by the Automatic Sprinkler Corporation. That parent entity eventually turned into Figgie International and was later rebranded as ATO in 1969. Every shakeup installed leaders who lacked any feel for the pumper business. They cared only about data earnings and financial reports. New models like the Pioneer, the Century, and the Spartan arrived during the 1960s. While these were solid machines, the brand's lead was slipping away after a massive blunder in the mid-50s. Management began sourcing motors from outside vendors instead of building their own. Swapping the custom 12 cylinders for Continental blocks saved money on the books. Outsourced engines were affordable and common, yet departments missed the heavy-duty proprietary V12s that made the company famous. If the heart of the truck was a generic motor, could it still be called a premium product? The identity crisis worsened. ATO bought out the Snorkel Fire Equipment firm in 1973. They added various aerial platforms to their catalog. It was decent gear, but it lacked the original engineering DNA of the brand. It was bought in tech while rival companies were busy coming up with their own breakthroughs. Pierce launched efficient trucks with up-to-date tech, and E1 introduced radically new concepts to the industry. Seagrave updated their roster much quicker. The longtime industry king was suddenly gasping for air. The folks at the Elmira plant witnessed this downfall firsthand. Veterans with 3 decades of craftsmanship were forced to lower their standards just to hit aggressive delivery targets. Rigs that would have been flagged for tiny flaws years ago were now cleared for shipment despite obvious defects. The pride of crafting America's finest fire rigs faded as corporate owners prioritized quarterly profits over long-term excellence. Veterans remembered when the American LaFrance brand actually carried weight, back when big city fire chiefs visited the Elmira shop to watch their trucks being constructed, when workers pointed to 30-year-old rigs and proudly said, "I'm the one who built that." That spirit was dying. New bosses brought in efficiency gurus who timed every task to demand faster production. The master craftsmanship that defined American LaFrance was sacrificed for the sake of speed and uniformity. Union reps fought back. They warned that cutting corners would ruin the brand's name. They were absolutely right. Longtime loyal fire chiefs began shopping around at competitors like Pierce and E1 instead. It wasn't that rivals were superior, but that American LaFrance wasn't building them like they used to. Word traveled fast among firefighters. The industry leader was now cutting corners just to hit profit targets. Hope arrived in 1981. American LaFrance opened a massive 500,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility in nearby Southport, New York. Perhaps this signaled a new commitment to Elmira. Maybe they would invest to regain the top spot. That hope lasted 4 years. In January 1985, Figgie International announced plans to close the Elmira plant. The stated reason was prolonged financial losses. 320 jobs were at risk. City manager John Gridley told the press the news was completely unexpected. The only hint was their recent series of aggressive overtures toward the local labor unions. Gridley blamed the collapse on a recent history of corporate mismanagement. He was right. The workers weren't the problem. They had built quality rigs for over a century. The issue was owners who didn't value the legacy. Within weeks, the decision to close was final. American LaFrance would leave Elmira. On June 28, 1985, the final truck rolled off the line. After 112 years dating back to 1873, the historic factory finally fell silent. 320 people lost their jobs. The numbers don't show the reality. Some spent their entire careers there, hired at 18 and retiring at 65 without another employer. Some were second generation. Their fathers used those same machines building trucks with men they'd known forever. A few were third generation, grandfathers who started back when the firm was still known as American LaFrance Fomite. Dads built wartime rigs in the 40s. Sons expected 30 more years of work. It all ended that June. The assembly line went quiet. The welding torches finally went cold. The paint booth that finished thousands of those iconic red trucks sat empty. Workers left carrying toolboxes their fathers gave them, filled with specialized gear from decades of trade. Some cried, some raged, but most felt hollow. Where do you turn when your only world disappears? Local papers covered the fallout, interviewing the men who had dedicated their lives to the craft. Photos showed empty shops. Officials promised to attract new business, but everyone already knew the truth. American LaFrance wasn't coming back. The name might survive elsewhere, but the heart of the company in Elmira was officially finished. The plant didn't vanish instantly. Some buildings kept parts and office staff for a while, but the pulse was gone. The assembly line where those trucks came together was over. The veterans who knew every weld and bolt were gone. Elmira had lost more than just jobs. It lost its title as the fire engine capital. For a century, that meant something. Now it was history. The firm promised the brand would continue production down in Virginia. Workers didn't buy it. They'd seen corporate owners in action and knew what was coming next. They were right. Chapter 7, Figgie International reopened American LaFrance months later in Bluefield, Virginia. Not in a new factory, but a Kersey facility that manufactured battery-powered mining and aircraft towing tractors. American LaFrance had essentially become Kersey American LaFrance. It was just a subsidiary now, a badge slapped onto another firm's plant with a skeleton crew compared to the old Elmira days. They rolled out fresh designs like the Century 2000 line and the Pacemaker, which utilized PM fab frames alongside the Pioneer 90 on Spartan gear. Truly, American LaFrance had stopped manufacturing their own rigs. They just bolted together parts from outside suppliers. Around 1991, they bought Han Motors and launched the Patriot. It seemed like growth, but the market had already left them behind. Pierce Manufacturing reigned supreme by the early 90s. E1 took Silver Seagrave, kept their share, and American LaFrance barely placed. A legendary name coasting on fumes while buyers switched to rivals, manufacturing defects surfaced, and the help desk phones started ringing off the hook. Sales tanked. Figgie International crunched the data and realized the writing was on the wall. In 1994, Figgie declared they were pulling the plug, come late June. After 162 years dating back to John Rogers' 1832 hand pumper business, the brand died, or so it seemed. 1995 saw the first rebirth when Freightliner, a Daimler subsidiary, scooped up the remains. The man behind the deal was James Hebe, a Freightliner exec, who actually got his start at American LaFrance. He was convinced that Freightliner's muscle plus the American LaFrance legacy was a winning combination. In 1997, their Ladson plant opened. Operations eventually shifted to Somerville, debuting the Metropolitan in 1999 and the Liberty in 2005. The Eagle custom frame stayed in production, and they even branched out into Hamburg, Ephrata, and Sanford, Florida. By 2005, American LaFrance ranked as the continent's fifth biggest builder of emergency rigs. Number 5, not the leader, not even the runner-up. For a former kingpin, this was just slow failure masked as a comeback. That December, Freightliner handed American LaFrance over to a New York investment group called Patriarch Partners. However, the Ladson plant wasn't part of the transaction. Patriarch had a temporary lease, but Daimler Chrysler wanted the space back to crank out Dodge Sprinter vans. During the summer of 2007, Patriarch relocated American LaFrance to a fresh Somerville location. It was a massive 500,000 square foot hub. This was supposed to be their turning point. Instead, it signaled the downfall. They bled $52 million in 2006 and another $52 million in 2007. Over $104 million in debt. Later, American LaFrance sought Chapter 11 bankruptcy on January 28, 2008. The company blamed a botched rollout of an IBM business software suite. In reality, poor leadership, shoddy builds, and an outdated catalog had driven their clientele straight to the competition. By late July of that year, American LaFrance exited bankruptcy, carrying a whole new strategy. They planned to shift truck body production over to their shops in Hamburg and Ephrata. The Somerville site would stick to making cabs frames and their line of Condor industrial trucks. That strategy crumbled within a year. By 2009, both satellite plants shut down, cramming everything back into Somerville. The business just kept withering away, slashing staff, building fewer rigs, and losing influence. In 2013, American LaFrance downsized its Somerville footprint yet again. Then on January 17, 2014, the axe finally fell. Patriarch Partners declared that American LaFrance was closing up shop for good, ending a legacy that began in 1832. The story was over. There were no miracles left. Everything left was liquidated to settle debts, with unfinished engines auctioned off for scrap and spares. Machinery was hauled away by rivals, leaving the American LaFrance trademark as little more than a hollow name. What's left now, you'll find a few pristine American LaFrance relics on display at the North Charleston Fire Museum. Enthusiasts own roughly 10% of those 700 rigs. A handful of country firehouses still rely on old American LaFrance units that were tough enough to survive 7 decades. Today, that old Somerville factory just stores inventory for a fencing contractor. That's how the story ends. This was the innovator behind the cab forward engine and the powerhouse that cranked out thousands of rigs for World War II. An industry giant that protected every big city in the States is now just a storage unit for rolls of wire fence. Figgie International snatched up American LaFrance, shuttered Elmira, and then Freightliner flipped it to Patriarch Partners. Patriarch Partners drove it straight into the ground before quitting. Every new owner vowed to keep the name alive. They all failed, not for lack of quality, but because corporate sharks aren't interested in actually growing a business. They just bleed assets dry and dump the rest. American LaFrance lasted 112 years in Elmira, making top-tier trucks. It barely survived 29 years under big money management before the whole thing finally collapsed. The contrast between those two eras says everything you need to know about the decline of American industry. Do you recall American LaFrance? Did your dad or your grandfather pull shifts at that Elmira plant? Maybe you were the one behind the wheel of an American LaFrance rig throughout your firefighting career. Perhaps you've admired those old 700 series trucks at parades and wondered what happened to the manufacturer. Drop your memories in the comments if you found this story about how big money vultures gutted a national icon compelling. Please give us a like and share this with your fellow history buffs, and hit subscribe for more stories on the legendary American companies that defined industries before they vanished.